Top of the day to you all. Welcome once again to Module 6 of Edu 314, Research Methods. Research methods can be divided into two broad categories: qualitative research and quantitative research. Qualitative research comprises research in which the data concerned can be analyzed in terms of numbers. What do I mean by this? Assuming you have given your students a pretest in terms of achievement test before the lesson, and after the lesson you administer the same set of achievement sets to them, at both the pretest and post-test. You are going to mark, and when you mark, you assign numbers. And when you now compare their scores at the pretest and post-test together, the type of analysis you are doing or the type of research you are embarking on is called quantitative research, because it involves the analysis of numbers. The other one, when research describes events, persons, and so forth scientifically without the use of numerical data, such research is termed qualitative research. Assuming you want to look at the advent of science education in Nigeria, mere looking at the topic, it is historical in nature, because you have to look at the type of science we practiced before the advent of the missionaries, before the advent of the colonial masters, up to the present moment. And by the time you are doing that, you are embarking on historical research. Now, research design. Research design in education are numerous. The prominent among these designs are historical research, descriptive research, correlational research, and experimental research. Historical research. We use historical research to determine, evaluate, and explain past events, to be well informed of the present, and make a more reliable and dependable prediction of the future. Like the example I gave earlier, the advent of science education in Nigeria. You want to know how was it done before now? What is obtainable now? What can we do to better science education in Nigeria in the future? So this is an example of historical research. Historical analysis may be directed toward an individual, an idea, a movement, or an institution. Experimental research, on the other hand, it is a scientific investigation in which an investigator manipulates and controls one or more independent variables and observes the dependent variables for variation concomitant to the manipulation of the independent variables. Experimental research provided a systematic and logical method for answering the question: if this is done under meticulously controlled conditions, what will happen? Experimental research tests hypotheses. Experimental research involves manipulating experimental variables and random assignment of subjects to treatment and control groups to investigate cause and effect relationship. The treatment group is exposed to the influence of the treatment consideration. The control group is not. Now, for instance, you want to know the effects of laboratory method on student academic achievement. In this case, you have to compare the laboratory method with the existing conventional lecture method. So what I'm saying in essence here is that you have to assign some students to the group that will be taught using the conventional method, another set of students to the group that will be taught using the laboratory method. Now, you use laboratory method to teach a group, and you use conventional method to treat another group. And at the end of the experiment, you compare their scores in the various achievement tests you will administer to them. Now, experimental research concepts. There are some concepts being used in experimental research, and you should be able to, familiarize yourself with them so that when you get to the field, you are not confused. The first one there is called variables. These are the conditions or characteristics that the researcher manipulates, controls, or observes. There are factors that can be measured on numerical scale of values. Examples are height, weight, score, sex, etc. There are 4 types of variables here. We have the independent variables, the dependent variables, the intervening variables, and the extraneous variables. Now, what is independent variables? These are variables, and they are the condition of factors that the researcher manipulates or controls in his or her attempts to ascertain their relationship to observed phenomena. Now, the example I gave earlier, you want to know the effect of laboratory method on student academic achievement in your subject areas. You have to compare that with the existing conventional lecture method. So, the laboratory method and the conventional lecture method are your independent variables. They are the ones you are going to manipulate in order to get the scores of your students. So, here in this type of example, the method of teaching are your what? Independent variables. Now, the dependent variable are the conditions or factors that appear, disappear, or vary as the researcher introduces, removes, or varies independent variables. Now here, the scores of your students in the examples we have been given all along are your what? Dependent variables. Their scores are dependent on the effectiveness or the method of teaching you want to use. And I told you the method of teaching are the independent variables. So the dependent variables are the scores your students will have in the achievement test you administer to them before and after the treatment, that is after the lesson, after you must have taught them. So the dependent variables are your students' or scores. Then we have the intervening variables. The intervening variables, they are certain variables which cannot be controlled. You can't control them or measured directly, though may have pertinent effects upon the outcome of a research. The intervening variable cause they intervene between the cause and the effect. Examples are sex, anxiety, motivation, fatigue, etc. For instance, in this our established, the given examples, effect of laboratory method on student academic achievement, we compared it with the conventional lecture method. You are looking at the effect of the method of teaching. Whereas a student may score low marks not because the method you have used did not have effect, did not have positive effect on his or her achievement. It may be because of his It may be because of gender influence, maybe whether the student is male or female. So this is what is called intervening variables. The last one there is called extraneous variables. These are variables that cannot be manipulated by the researcher, which may have a significant influence upon the outcome of a research. Examples are teachers' competence or age, socio-economic level, and academic ability levels of the student under study. You get this one? This is extraneous. All things being equal, a teacher might not be the master of his or her subjects. So if a teacher doesn't understand the concept to be taught, or doesn't know how to pass the information across to the student, this may affect the understanding of the student and eventually their achievements in such subjects. Now we are still continuing with the experimental research concept. We have the experimental group. And what do you mean by experimental group? This is a group of subjects that receive the treatment, the independent variable under study. That is the experimental group. For instance, now you have divided them into two groups. The group that will be taught using laboratory method, that is the experimental group. The other one that will not receive laboratory method is called the control group. That is the control group. Yeah, the one that you are going to use the existing conventional lecture method to teach. That is your control group. The experimental group is the one that will use the laboratory method. That is the one you want to know its effect on student academic achievement if used to teach them. So you are going to use that laboratory method there under the experimental group. Then the control group, these are the students. You will use the existing conventional lecture method to teach. So they are not going to be taught using the laboratory method of teaching. Then we have the internal validity. Internal validity. What do I mean by this? An experiment is said to be valid if the independent variables precisely have genuine effect on the dependent variables in the study. Genuine effect. That is whether negative or positive. Then we have the external validity. This is the extent to which the variable relationships can be generalized to other settings, other treatment variables, other measurement variables, and other populations. Now we go to experimental design. Experimental design. An experimental design is the blueprint of the steps a researcher will take when testing his or her hypothesis to draw valid conclusions in respect of the presumed relationships between the variables that create a particular situation. Then we have two types of experimental design. We have the true experimental design. In true experimental design, random assignment of subjects to experimental and control groups equated the groups as nearly as possible. Random assignment of subjects. Then we have the quasi-experimental design. In this design, we have subjects are also grouped without the application of random assignment of subject to experimental and control treatment, which make the equivalence of the group skeptical. Here, under the true experimental design, you assign them to group randomly. But here, you use what is called intert classes. That is, for instance, if you want to use junior secondary school level 3, and the junior secondary school level 3 has about 5 arms, you may decide to use just junior secondary school level, class A. That is under quasi-experimental design. But under true experimental design, you go to all the arms of the junior secondary school level. You randomly pick students from each class. You now assemble them together. That is what is called true experimental design. Under the quasi, you don't assign students to groups on random basis. You use intert classes. With this, we've come to the end of the module 6 of this course, Edu 314. I call it maybe module 6A, because we still have B and C. So we shall meet in the next lesson. Do have a great day.